We have a protective layer that keeps our insides protected, I guess I'll say again, from the external environment like water. Water doesn't just soak through into our body because we have a layer of skin. So that's a perfect segue to today's topic, which is the integumentary system. We'll pick up where we left off on Friday. All of you will use your skin at some point today, probably to keep dry from the rain. So our agenda today looks like this. Well, first off, I want to just mention that you had a quiz that was due before class today. Everyone here now has turned that in, so great. I will get those grades back to you. The multiple choice questions are obviously pretty quick to grade. The longer answer question may take me a few days. I generally really work to get assessments back to students as quickly as I can, but it will take me a couple days to get through those and get those back. But you can expect it probably later this week, so I'll get that into you. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to quickly review epithelial cells. We talked about how we classify epithelial cells by shape and the number of layers. Then I'm going to introduce the integumentary system. Then you're going to do a small group activity called dermis versus epidermis, which is a fun and exciting way to learn about those two layers of your skin. Then we'll come back to lecture. I'll talk a little bit about the appendages of the skin. So that is glands and hair and nails and things like that. And then if we have time, I have a segment, our first edition of Human Anatomy in the News for the semester. You'll see I'll intersperse these throughout the semester. There's recent research that is relevant to class that you might find interesting. And then we'll wrap things up, give some reminders today. So that's the structure for today's class. Before we dive in, what questions do you have? We good? All right. So quick review. In class on Friday, I asked you to create this table and to draw these three types of epithelial cells. You all did this and you uploaded a picture with your ticket out. But just to make sure we've got it, I have an example, a student example here. You can see with simple cuboidal cells, remember simple means there's a single layer. Cuboidal simply means that they're more or less cube shaped, not precisely but close. Stratified squamous, stratified means there's many layers. Squamous means they're kind of flat. They're kind of like the shape of like a fried egg with like a rounded disc with a bulge in it, or maybe a UFO a little bit, depending on what kind of UFO. And then we have simple columnar. Again, remember simple is a single layer. Columnar simply means that they are taller than they are wide. So very similar to the simple cuboidal, only they're kind of more elongate cells. So just a quick refresher about that. Questions on that? Okay, let's talk about the integumentary system then. Remember, this refers to the skin plus its derivatives. I want to give a brief introduction. I covered a little bit of this on Friday, but not too much. Then we're going to get into the two primary layers of the skin, the epidermis and the dermis, and the appendages of the skin, and kind of wrap things up. So I did talk about this a little bit on Friday, just as a refresher. The skin is our largest organ in the body. Remember, it's about 7% of your body weight. So that's a fair bit of weight. So let's say somebody like me, I weigh, I don't know, let's say roughly 80 kilograms. So 7% of 80, well, let's see, 10% of 80 would be 8 kilograms. Let's run a little less than that. Maybe 6-ish kilograms of my body weight is my skin, which is, what's that, 12, 14 pounds or so? Wow, that's a lot of skin. So yeah, it's a big organ. And as I mentioned, it's composed of these two layers, primary layers, the epidermis, which is this stratified squamous epithelium. We just talked about stratified squamous epithelium, what that looks like. And then the lower layer is the dermis. And this is composed of loose areolar and dense irregular connective tissue. Those two types of connective tissue will make more sense after lab on Tuesday. Remember that the epidermis is derived from the ectoderm germ layer, whereas the dermis is derived from the mesoderm germ layer. Then below those two layers, we have something called the hypodermis, which is technically not part of your skin, but we're going to talk about it a little bit anyway, because it does provide some important functions related to the skin. So for example, this is where we find adipose or fat tissue that provides insulation to various parts of the body and is closely associated with the skin. And I mentioned that hair and nails develop during the fetal period. So even though the epidermis is derived from the ectoderm that's formed during the embryonic period, the hair and nails develop in that fetal period after 8 weeks of development. So let's talk a little bit about, did I talk about this hypodermis? Did I get to this slide on Friday? I don't think I did. Did I? No, this is new. Okay, good. So the hypodermis, as I mentioned, is not technically part of the skin, but we're going to talk about it anyway. Like the dermis, it is derived from the mesoderm. And what it does is it anchors the skin to the underlying structure. So your skin has some flexibility, but it's not completely loose from the underlying tissue. And that's important because if it was completely loose, your skin would just kind of flop around. But if it was completely tight, then it wouldn't allow some flexibility as your body moves. The hypodermis is important because it helps insulate the body. As I mentioned, it contains a lot of adipose or fat tissue, and that is important for insulation and also protection in some cases. And the structure of this is different between males and females generally. We're not going to get into that in detail, but it's important to note that some of these structures differ in different folks depending on sex, but also depending on a number of other factors. And as I mentioned, this tissue includes areolar, so that is a type of connective tissue, as well as adipose tissue, which is also a type of connective tissue. And you can see what this looks like here in context. So this is an example of skin structure. This is an image from your textbook. You have this, but we have this outer layer, this epidermis of the stratified squamous cells. Then we have the dermis, which is this thicker layer here that contains it contains some muscle tissue to types of muscle that allows your hair to become erect under certain circumstances. It has nerves, it has blood vessels, et cetera, et cetera. And then below this, we have this fatty hypodermis layer. You can see all those structures in here. I'm not going to walk through all of these in detail right now, but it's nice just to see the overview about how all of that comes together. Notice that your epidermis is thin compared to your dermis. Notice that the dermis is much thicker relative to the epidermis. And that's true in most places on your body, but not always. So for example, I mentioned at the bottom of your feet on your heels, you have a much thicker layer of epidermis, and that is to provide cushioning as you walk. And we can take this and we can look at this. This is an image from, I believe this is from a human cadaver. And you'll see this image when we remove the skin from your cats as well. But what they've done here is kind of remove these different layers sequentially. So you can see there's the epidermis, the dermis, and this connective tissue, kind of more pink. In the hypodermis, you can see all these fatty cells in there. They're kind of orangey yellow. And then we have what's called the deep fascia. This is a kind of connective tissue between the hypodermis and, in this case, the underlying skeletal muscle tissue. So you can see what those layers look like and how they're formed one on top of each other and how they're kind of attached to each other to compose skin. That's the general structure of skin. That's about as much detail as we're really going to get into, other than I'm going to talk about sweat glands and hair follicles in just a second. Let me pause and see what questions you have. All right, so this 12 or 14 pounds of skin that I'm hauling around every day, why do I have it? What does it do? I'm going to talk about 5 primary functions of the skin. The first is protection. I kind of alluded to this at the start of lecture. It protects against all kinds of things, not only physical abrasion from like bumps and scrapes and things like that, but also from potentially harmful chemicals. That's why, for example, you can go swimming in a chlorinated swimming pool and your internal organs don't get damaged by that chlorine because it's blocked by your skin. Protects you from water loss. So under dry, hot conditions, your body would evaporate, water from your body would evaporate and you'd lose a lot of water uncontrollably. And your skin helps regulate that. Of course, losing water is an important adaptation in certain circumstances to reduce your body temperature. And as I'll mention many times in this class, that's what humans are best at, sweating. Also protects you from UV radiation and actually utilizes UV radiation in some chemical processes to produce essential vitamins. Also helps us regulate temperature. So and this happens in a number of ways. It provides insulation, but also this capillary network in the dermis can be regulated to either help you dump off heat if you're overheating or conserve heat if you're getting too cold. So, for example, if you're outside on a cold winter day, This is why your fingers and your toes feel numb before anything else. Not only are they kind of exposed to that cold more, but under those cold conditions, your body reduces blood flow to your extremities so that it can conserve that blood flow and therefore that heat in the core of your body where it's most important. And as I talked about, these sweat glands help regulate that body temperature as well. Question, yes, please. Shivering is a response. So shivering is related to, I guess it's related to that in the sense that shivering is when your body kind of involuntarily creates these repeated contractions of your skeletal muscle or spasms. And what that does is that creates a lot of heat, and that it's called shivering thermogenesis. So thermogenesis means heat creation, and it allows your body to, when you're in danger of your core temperature becoming too low, it's one way to get yourself to raise your temperature up. And any of you that have done any exercise ever in your life, which is probably all of us, know that when you exercise, you get hot. And the reason you get hot is because those skeletal muscles, when they're moving, they create a lot of heat. And so that's kind of a way to create that heat out of necessity, I guess, in that case. What's cool is there's some snake species, pythons, they're ectothermic, so they don't produce their own body heat like we do. But the moms, when they lay their eggs, they coil around the eggs and then they shiver to create heat to keep the eggs warm. So they kind of incubate their eggs, even though they are technically ectotherms and can't create their own heat. It's pretty neat way to keep their little baby snake eggs warm. Good question. Cool. Third function is excretion. So we'll talk about the digestive and the urinary systems later in the semester, but your skin also excretes urea, which is a byproduct of protein metabolism. We excrete a lot of urea, of course, in our urine, when we urinate, but also through your skin. You remove excess salts from the body as part of your sweat, and also serves for purpose in water regulation as well through your sweat. Fourth function is the production of vitamin D. So in a complicated chemical pathway that we're not going to get into, exposure of certain cells in your epidermis to UV radiation allows them to synthesize vitamin D, which is essential for, it plays an important role in calcium regulation and calcium uptake. And so this is why getting sunlight is important for your health. And you don't need much of it at all. You need very, very little sunlight exposure to your skin to produce enough vitamin D, but some is absolutely essential. You can, of course, get vitamin D through your diet as well, but it's not quite as effective. That's why they supplement milk with vitamin D, because back in the day, a bunch of young kids, when they were living in squalid tenement buildings in big cities and not getting any sunlight, like literally like working in factories for 12 hours a day and just not exposed to any sunlight, these kids developed rickets early in life. And rickets is when the bones, your long bones don't develop properly. So you see kids with like bowed legs and things like that. That's because they weren't able, their body wasn't able to process calcium properly because they weren't making any vitamin D. So they had no exposure to the sun. So as a solution, they started putting vitamin D in milk, thinking the kids would drink this milk and get exposure. Seems to me that a better solution would be not to have kids working in factories for 12 hours a day, but that's a different story for a different day. Yeah, go ahead.
We found that you take like mushrooms and you expose the gills on the bottom to UV radiation or in the sunlight, they actually have the ability to absorb it over a couple of days. Like, and it magnifies it like 20 times the amount. Like it's like,
oh, so you, and then you can ingest the
IUs or something like that. Then you can ingest it like 10, 20, 30,000 IUs.
from mushroom. Huh. Mushrooms keep coming up in this class. It's weird.
I know. You can like pick the stems out, leave them upside down in the sunlight, let them dry. Like,
really?
Like 2-3 days, but any longer than that, it actually starts to decrease.
All right. Well, make sure you store-bought mushrooms. Don't just pick mushrooms outside if you're going to try that at home.
No.
Yeah. That's interesting. I had no idea. That's really cool. It's curious. Well, yeah, I won't go too much down there, but that's interesting. Last function of the skin is sensory reception. We talked a little bit about the various types of nerve endings in your skin. I'm not going to get into too much detail. I actually have a human anatomy in the news segment about researchers who discovered the different cell types that can sense touch and temperature in your skin. They won a Nobel Prize for it, actually. But it's important to think of your skin as a sensory organ as well. And we rely on this all the time, even if we're not really thinking about it. What's interesting about your skin is that it's receiving a ton of signals that your brain just completely filters out. So like until I say right now, that you can feel, if you want, the weight of your shirt on your shoulders, none of you were thinking, doubtful that any of you were thinking about that. But now if you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, I can feel my shirt on my skin. I didn't think of that. So your skin is constantly delivering sensory input to your brain, and your brain is working to filter all of that out and just tell you what's important. And generally, as you're sitting in class, feeling your shirt on your shoulders and your back is not terribly important, so it filters it out. 5 functions of the skin. That's all we're going to talk about with that. Good. Sophie, go ahead. Is it about mushrooms?
No.
Pythons? Okay, go ahead.
I would that the sensory perception, how you said, like, you know, your brain filters that out with stuff that you pay attention to, stuff you don't. And that does that correlate at all with things like ADHD where you don't filter out all the signals, and so that's why you kind of distracted the way your clothes and class and the brain and being tired.
Right. Super great question. I don't know enough about ADHD to even speculate. I could speculate, but I wouldn't have a good basis for it. So really interesting thought, but I don't know the answer to that, how that works. I suspect there's different ways that it can work under different circumstances, but save that for your psychology professor. Yeah, great question. All right, who's ready for epidermis versus dermis? You ready for it? Yes, I love the enthusiasm. Okay, so what you're going to do is this. You're going to go to Google Slides, and what I did for this section of class, comparing and contrasting, is the dermis and epidermis. Instead of me standing here telling you about it, you're going to look at the slides, and now you're welcome. Now you have a copy of all those slides as well, and you're going to be on one team or the other, and you are going to spend 5 minutes reading and learning and taking notes about your skin layer, either dermis or epidermis. Then I'm going to throw you with a partner that's in the opposite group. And then you're going to teach each other about your layer. You're going to spend 5 minutes telling the other person, you just learned about the epidermis, and my partner's Jada. I'm going to tell her all about the epidermis. Then she's going to teach me about the dermis. And then we're going to be totally awesome. And then you can argue about which layer is best and figure out how you want to decide that. Participation here is 3 class points. And I will put I'm going to provide a QR code for the Google Slides in a second here. What you can do is scan that, go to Google Slides, and then just save a copy of it in your own files. And then you can have it and manipulate it and type in there and all that stuff. Sound good? Great. So here's Team Dermis is going to be Rand, Morgan, Sophie, Taryn, Jessica, Holly, Marge, Tia, and Veronica. Team Epidermis is Sarah, Jada, Drew, Abby, Zoe, Matt, Travis, Julia, Kylie. Just use a random list to do that. And then we'll pair you up. After 5 minutes, I'll pair you up with someone on the other team. Sound good? All right, let's do the QR code is right there. Go for it. I'll set the timer. I'll come around and answer questions. And I think what I'll do is pause this recording as well while we're doing this bit. All right, let's go ahead and bring it back to the full group. If you want to go ahead and get to your regular spot, or you can stay where you are, of course, it's up to you. The goal of this activity is a couple. One is to just break up lectures, so you're learning the material in a different way than me just talking about it. And also, having to teach that material to someone else is really the best way to learn it. So you're not only looking at it for yourself, but you're having to explain it to someone else. Also, now you have those slides and you have this table that you've made, which is a really nice study summary guide for yourself. So good job, everyone. I bounced around, heard some great conversations. It seems like you understand the material well. If you have questions, let me know. You don't need to submit anything for this. And it is worth 3 class points, and I've just marked who's here, so you'll see that show up in black. So good job. Any questions about dermis, epidermis before we carry on? Okay. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Good question. Let's talk about, it was like a plant here. Let's go to the appendages of the skin, talking about nails, hair and your glands. So hair is considered an appendage of the skin, but what's important is that there is more than one kind of hair. The first is something called lanugo. That is this very fine, unpigmented, so it's like a whitish gray color, very like downy hair that appears during the second trimester of development. So this is during the fetal period of development. And this is a kind of hair that is generally gone by the time babies are born and serves to kind of protect them in the amniotic sac from amniotic fluid, not from amniotic fluid, but just kind of serves as a buffer as they're in that fluid. This usually before birth, so late in the fetal period, this lanugo is replaced by something called vellus. And this is again kind of this very soft, fine hair that we don't have too much of as an adult. I can provide a really nice example of this because when you go bald at a certain, when you go bald, often this vellus then grows on your scalp. So I've got a nice crop of vellus going here. It's awesome. Then finally, the hair that you probably think of when someone says hair is something called terminal hair. So this is generally, it's thicker, it's coarser, it's pigmented most often, but not always. Generally in development, it appears first on the scalp and your eyebrows and eyelashes. So that's all the same kind of hair, although there's some differences. And then later during development, specifically during puberty, it appears in the axillary and pubic region. So axillary, we haven't talked about this yet, but that just simply refers to your armpit area, as well as in some cases facial hair, in the case of a beard, and also then you grow more of that on your arms, legs, and trunk as beginning at puberty and later in puberty. And so that is the hair that's on the rest of your body. And your hair is actually really important and serves a number of functions that I'll talk about in a second. But for now, I want you to know that there's three kinds of hair. Generally, our discussion is going to focus on terminal hair because that's kind of the most prevalent in adult humans. So this terminal hair is a flexible strand, as you know. It's composed of cells, but all of these cells are dead and what's called keratinized. So there's this protein called keratin that composes your hair as well as your fingernails. This kind of rigid but also flexible protein that composes your skin. And the color, different hair colors, is due to melanin that's produced by cells called melanocytes in your skin. And as you get older, they don't really do such a good job. And instead of producing melanin, they often produce like air bubbles. And this is why hair turns white or gray as you age. And what's important to note is it's highly variable. This can happen. You can start getting gray hairs in your head when you're 19. Some folks, it doesn't happen until they're 70. It's a huge age span across which that can happen. The three main parts of the terminal hair are the bulb, the root, and the shaft. The bulb is where there's live cells. I'm going to show you a diagram of this in a second. The root is the part of the hair that's embedded in the skin, so it's below the skin surface. And the shaft is what you see that comes up out of the hair. So let me show you what those three parts look like in a diagram here. You can see the layer of epidermis here, your dermis being here, and you can see that the hair bulb is down here. So this is where you have the live cells that are producing, that are becoming keratinized and kind of moving up. This hair root then goes through the skin layer. So as you know, anytime if anyone's ever pulled out a hair, you know that it's not just the hair on the outside of the skin that comes off, but all of this hair down here, and then pulls up the hair bulb too, by hurts. And then the hair shaft is the part of the hair that's sticking out of the skin. Notice here, this is an important structure. There's a type of smooth muscle called erector pili. And these are a bundle of muscles that allow your hairs that pull them to become erect. So when you get something like goosebumps, when you're cold, we've been talking about thermoregulation. This is what moves those hairs into an upright position. A good example of this, a non-human example, would be your cat. When your cat is kind of normal and happy, the hairs kind of lay down flat. But as soon as your cat gets startled or sees another animal it doesn't like, it makes itself look bigger because all of these erector pili muscles contract and pull all of its hairs up, so the hairs kind of stick out instead of just laying flat. That's all we're really going to talk about with hairs. I'm not going to get into a ton of detail about how these cells develop or anything there. I just want you to know the hair bulb, the hair root, and the hair shaft, kind of where it's located in the layer of the skin. Question, Sophie.
There ever like regrowing hair bulbs underneath? Burnt hair bulbs, like, does it like compare it to go when they shed?
It does not, there's not, so the hair is continually growing out of here, and then what happens is when this hair falls off, there's just other hairs around it that replace it. It's not that there's kind of more hair coming from the skin. Like this kind of continuously producing hair, but they just kind of shed. And then other ones replace it. So at any given moment, you're constantly shedding hair, and but there's other hair bulbs around that are producing hair. So you have like the same average number of hairs, even as those hairs are of different length and some are having lost. Well, you technically never have the same hair in the same spot. No, you could. So for example, if you shave with like a razor, shave your beard, let's say, you're only cutting the hair right here. And then when it regrows, that same hair will grow back up, continue to grow from that spot. Also, it's a myth that if you shave, your hair grows back thicker or more dense or anything like that. I was told that when I was a kid, like, oh, if you start shaving, your beard's gonna grow in thicker. So I immediately started shaving a lot to grow. No, I'm just kidding. But it's actually not true at all. It doesn't affect it at all. But it is the same hair shaft, which is why it can be so prickly right after shaving, because you have all of these like fresh cut hairs that are all the same length and they all grow at the same time. Cool. Let's talk about sweat glands. What time we got? Yeah, we can talk about sweat glands for a minute. Sweat glands are also known as sudoriferous glands, which is fun to say. They are all over your body, almost all parts of your skin, with some exceptions. For example, the palms of your hands don't have sweat glands. You can, normally you're sweating about half a liter a day. So just to give you a visual on that, this bottle is a liter. So you're sweating about this much liquid every day, kind of normally. But it can be up to 12 liters a day if you're hot and exercising. So any of you that have been on sports teams this fall semester, have been practicing over the past couple of weeks, that's why your coach is probably making sure you're drinking a lot of water, because if you lose 12 of these a day, you need to replace it. Sweat comes from your blood. So it's actually the liquid is filtered out through your blood. And when I say filtered, I simply mean that the fluid of the blood comes out, but blood cells, important proteins in your blood and things like that stay in circulation. It's by and large mostly water with a little bit of dissolved salts, as well as some metabolic wastes. I mentioned urea before, also ammonia and uric acid, which are also byproducts of protein metabolism. And also what's interesting is your sweat is acidic, and this helps prevent bacterial growth. So it keeps those bacteria from colonizing too much on your skin surface because of that acidity. So we are #1 sweaters in the world, our claim to fame. Importantly, though, not all sweat is the same. So we have 2 types of sweat glands. The first, actually should have put this slide up, not all this information. I'll just walk you through this. The first is what we generally think of when I say sweat gland. This is probably what you think of. It's called an eccrine gland. And these are found throughout the skin, and they produce our true sweat that's used for evaporative cooling. We also have something called an apocrine gland, and these are associated with hairs, and they are confined to the axillary, anal, and genital areas. So they're associated with pubic hairs, right? And they produce not this kind of regular sweat that's just important for evaporative cooling, because those aren't really places where there's going to be a lot of evaporative cooling, but rather they produce a kind of sweat that is responsible for producing a musky odor that is thought to play an important role in mate attraction. And actually it has been shown to play a very important role in mate attraction. And interestingly, this odor is actually, this could be a whole class on this kind of thing, but it's thought that it signals information about your immune system capability and also kind of your genetic variation. And that's important because you don't want to mate with someone who's very closely genetically related to you. That's generally a bad idea in an evolutionary sense and also a societal sense. And so the smells produced by these glands can actually help indicate how, in a sense, how closely related you are to someone and help you kind of figure out what your mate is. Of course, these days it's all a bit scrambled because we take a lot of showers and we wear lots of deodorants and that kind of thing. So you're kind of out there in the dark. Dating would actually probably be way more efficient if everyone just kind of didn't use any body products for like a week beforehand. Plus, you went on a date, and then they could really get a feel for the other person's histocompatibility complex. That's just me. I haven't dated in a long time though, so we'll see how that goes. Okay. Finally, one other gland I want to talk about this one, and we'll wrap things up here, is something called the ceruminous glands. These are specialized, ceruminous glands and mammary glands are two other kinds of glands produced from the ectoderm of the germ layer ectoderm. The ceruminous, excuse me, let me say that again. Ceruminous glands produce wax in your ear canal. That's important for filtering out stuff from getting into your ear. And mammary glands are modified apocrine glands that produce milk in mammals. And so they are structurally and developmentally related to those apocrine glands, which is kind of interesting. That's all I'm going to say about glands. I think I might save the human anatomy in the news. I'll lead off the next class with that. But let me pause here and see what questions you have. Okay, so on your class program for Wednesday, I do have the link to the article for human anatomy in the news. You can ignore it for Wednesday. I'm not going to talk about it right here. We're just out of time. I'll put it on your next program as well. So you can skip over that for Wednesday. Don't worry about it. We'll get to it later. But I had a little, there's a recent study discovered what makes hair red. So I have a picture of the Weasley family. Okay, before you go, a couple quick reminders. Your first lab is tomorrow, finally, right? Morning lab starts at 9 o'clock and goes till just before noon. Afternoon lab starts at 1:10. A few important reminders for lab is please always wear closed-toed shoes. We're using instruments like scalpels. We don't do a lot of like intense lab work in lab other than our cat dissections, but for safety reasons, as with all of your labs, please wear closed-toed shoes, so no flip-flops. If you have long hair, please make sure it's pulled back. And again, this ties into cat dissections. If you're leaning over your cat, you don't want your hair dangling in there because that's gross. So please make sure you can pull that back. And finally, there's no food or drink in the lab room. There is a little table outside of the lab where you can leave your water bottles or drinks or whatever. Also, once we get lab started, I'll talk about this tomorrow, but it's very flexible schedule. You can go out and get your drink and use the restroom and that generally as you like in lab, with a few exceptions when we're doing group activities. So just know that it's a long period. I'll talk about it in detail tomorrow, but it is flexible. And finally, I see that I think everyone is signed up for visible body. Please bring a laptop if available to lab. We will be doing, or a tablet if that works for you. We will be doing some work on visible body, and students often like to have it so they can just do it right there in class. Any questions on lab? Then I have one more announcement for you. Okay, last announcement is that we have our tutoring session today. I've been talking to Danny, and it's early in the semester for tutoring sessions, probably for you to be thinking about it. But one thing he wants to do is mix it up so that the session is actually closer to the residential side of campus, at least once a week, given that it's in the evenings. So he's going to hold it today from 6 to 7 in the Ice Cube room in Beagley, which I don't actually know exactly where that is, but it's in Beagley Library. So yeah. Oh, cool. I thought it was named after the hip hop artist, but that's cool. Okay, so it's on the main floor to the right. It's covered in glass, looks like an ice cube. He's going to be there from 6 to 7. Just open time to come ask any questions. I mean, you can even just like, set that aside as your study time, and then he'll be there to answer any questions. We're just trying to make it as accessible and available to everyone as we can. Cool. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow in lab.